Please. All right. I've been asked to discuss the situation at the roller rink on New Year's Eve. The Sheriff's Department investigated this at the request of the Wichita Police Department. Would you shut that, Kelly? The investigation was completed and sent over to me in end of last month. I had one other question that I needed resolved that I got answers to last Thursday night. The recitation is here in terms of the facts. They're not particularly complicated. The young lady went to the skating rink. She'd been there for a couple hours. The skating rink has a policy that says when you arrive, you either have to have your own skates or you have to be able to rent skates from them. Otherwise, they don't want kids in there just walking around. She was able to get skates, but her boyfriend arrived, like I said, a couple hours after she did. They were out of skates his size, and so he was not allowed in. She had a verbal and pretty emotional reaction to this, made some threatening comments, made some disruptive comments, and she was asked to leave the facility. There were 3 off-duty officers, 2 male, 1 male, that evening, who were there at the facility. The female and one of the males, who was not the subject of the later interaction with the boyfriend we'll get to here momentarily, but a female officer and a male officer then escorted her out of the skating rink. So you have a sense of the place. There is a lobby, and then at the lobby is like a teller window, like it's a movie theater kind of thing. There's a plexiglass, I guess it is, and then under that is where the money changes hands. Then on either side are doors. You go in one, you come out the other, and so that's the lobby. Interior of the rink then is where she was. To her credit, she took off her skates and began to walk toward the exit doors. As she got to the door, there's a place where employees can go back behind the counter. She took a step behind the counter toward where the manager was, made some threatening comments again about I want my money back or else. The officers at that point tried to reach out to her. A bit of an altercation ensued. She started to go down. There was a kick made toward the female. They get her up, take her out then the door. Now we're into the lobby. There is surveillance cameras. There were surveillance cameras from inside the rink area. You can't see much of this. You do see her walking out, but right when she gets to the doors, it's pretty well out of view, and there's no cameras that are viewing the lobby area. You do get some sense of things from, like there's an overhead camera looking over the manager's head as she's at the counter window, but you really can't see things beyond that. They get out into the lobby. The female officer either lets go or loses her grip on the girl. The juvenile female, maybe it's a matter of perception, but either takes a swing at or sort of flails her arm to get away from whatever. Her hand is going toward the officer. The officers then at that point we take her into custody for disorderly conduct. They begin to take her down. The female officer is trying to put cuffs on her, and she's not having much success. The male officer, a different male officer now, has come in, and he is at her feet, the girl's feet, and trying to help calm or get her under control enough to get the cuffs on her. 4 employees of the rink, 2 kids who stuck around and talked to the cops, 1 parent who was dropping their kids off at the door, and you could see the whole thing through the glass doors that lead outside, as well as the 2 officers. So about 9 different witnesses all described that what happened next is the boyfriend, who had been outside and not allowed in, sees his girlfriend being arrested, hears her rather vocal upset at the situation, comes running into the building and begins to punch the male officer in the back of the head. He then reacts, and it's around that time that the kids begin to start using their phones to record. The officer takes 2 swings, misses the young man the first time, hits him the second. The kid, fairly unfazed, is up on his feet again. You've seen it at that point. I can describe it for you, but you've seen it. But what the officer was interviewed and said what he was thinking was, there's a room full of teenagers. The female officer still doesn't have control of the young lady. There are escalating steps that officers are taught. Verbal commands, obviously, the number one, or the lowest. Pardon me. Second would be something like pepper spray, where there's no fists, but that's the next least in terms of the escalation. Then there's like a baton or some blunt force instrument. The next would be, unless I'm missing something here, like a stun gun. I will say parenthetically, as an off-duty officer, he did not have a stun gun. That's not something they carry with them when they're off-duty. And then obviously the last thing you could do is lethal force. And so what he was thinking is, I don't want to keep fighting this kid. I got a room full of teenagers. I got a female officer who does not have the juvenile female under control. I'm going to use my least restrictive, least aggressive form of force here, and I'm going to push the kid away from me. So he pushes him across the foyer lobby, and then pepper sprays him. So the considerations here are what I do. I'll say right off the bat, the female officer, there's no exposure to any criminal liability to her whatsoever. She was behaving as she's supposed to. The young woman was making threats and took a swing at her, and they had every right to arrest her. The only question is whether the male officer could be charged with something. I will say that the young man was not injured. The only question would be a misdemeanor battery if he would be charged with that. There's a statute that didn't get mentioned in anything thus far that's been on the books since forever, and it's one that starts this analysis, and that is 215229. It's resisting arrest. It says a person is not authorized to use force to resist an arrest which such person knows is being made either by a law enforcement officer or by a private person summoned and directed by a law enforcement officer to make the arrest, even if the person arrested believes that the arrest is unlawful. And there's a reason for this. If I walk up and I say, I know who you are, you're Jim Smith, I recognize you, you got active warrants. You're like, no, you got the wrong guy. There's a legal process to go through to figure that out. But the option of physically fighting with the cops is not, it's illegal. And so I will say that I've had, from a purely legal analysis, the young man coming in, by all accounts, and punching the officer in the back of the head was an illegal act on his part. It then triggers the officer's ability, like anyone would have, to defend himself. So you look at self-defense, and whenever we're looking at self-defense in this state, you all know, at least you do now, that we have self-defense immunity, which has been commonly referred to over and over again now as stand your ground, but it's simply self-defense immunity. And for me to charge somebody who's acting in self-defense, I have to be able to establish, number one, that what they did was, so the steps are this, were they acting in self-defense, and if so, to be able to charge them and overcome an immunity motion, I have to be able to establish that what they were doing was not reasonable. And so, in this particular case, the young man punching the cop in the back of the head triggered the response from the officer. The punches, the throwing, pushing him away, there's no way I could say that was objectively unreasonable. And the standard really is a reasonable person. Could I show that a reasonable person would not have reacted that way? I think reasonable minds could disagree about the propriety of the way the officer acted, which means it is not decidedly an established not to be in a reasonable reaction. The young man then turns, and depending on who you ask and how they perceive things and where they come from and their perspective on things, the young man's reaction to the officer was either standing down and doing nothing, or bracing himself, or being in a fighting position. I've heard all three to describe what was all one act. Has a lot to do with how one perceives this sort of thing. But did the officer have to use his pepper spray? Was it the right thing to do? Could he have done something different? All of these questions get thrown around in these things. All of that's very interesting, but from my point of view as a prosecutor, I have to be able to establish that whatever the answer to those questions is, can I establish that what the officer did was, as a matter of law, not reasonable? And I can't. And so I'm not charging the officer with one count of misdemeanor battery for the interaction with the young man. I will say that I got all this information on the 27th, 28th of January, and I reviewed it. The law is very clear on this point. The resisting arrest statute is not, it doesn't equivocate. You cannot run up and punch cops while they're doing their job. I know this has garnered some interest. That's why you're all here. I would caution you, and normally I would say I'm done, thank you very much, what questions do you have? I'm going to add a little bit more here, and I'll be a little cryptic. I've really struggled with what I'm about to say or how to say it, and I'm not going to say much, but I had some inkling that there was more going on with at least the young lady that night, and it's not something is appropriate to share with the public. But I'm trying to be as transparent as I can without crossing a line. She had been through what I think would only be described as a traumatic situation that had nothing to do with cops, wasn't even in Wichita, wasn't at the skating rink. It was something in her private life leading up to this that very much colors, I think, what she did, how she reacted, and why her boyfriend was trying to defend her. I understand it. And so when you're making decisions about tonight to play the video, please take some, and I'm talking about media now, please take some caution in any portion of this that involves listening to or seeing her and what's going on with her and the female officer. I guarantee you, if you knew the rest of the story, you would be very cautious about that. So if you're thinking, that ain't much to go on, the answer is, you're damn right it's not. And that's what you're going to get from me. Any questions?
You charging him with anything?
Who?
The boy?
I'll take care of that for the same, I'll be as cryptic about that as I'm about the girl for the same reasons.
I didn't quite understand the part where you said it sounded like that altercation where she was like in the booth, and then you said female kicked out a female. What was
So she, the young woman you're talking about, she was in the, we'll call it the inner portion of the skating rink. She made a threat, she wanted her money back, etc. So they're walking her out, and as they're getting to the door, she takes a step toward behind the counter, makes a threatening comment to the manager again about wanting her money back. That's when the officers sort of grab her and start to take her out. She ends up going down. She kicks at the female officer. They get her back to her feet, get her out. The other male officer comes in. I'm trying to say this without being too repetitive, but it's now the same female officer, but a new male officer now in the lobby, and that's what, then you pick it up from there. Does that help clarify?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
I guess I'd just try to press a little more on the boy getting charged. I mean, is that something that people are going to expect to see here in the future?
We're going to work something out with him, and he's going to have some consequences, but I'll reach out through counsel and figure that out.
Now, the reason why you're working out something with him, is that because of the background that you kind of just mentioned?
Yes.
Knowing the full scope of the situation?
Everything is in context.
Is the officer who was put on desk duty that?
I'll have to defer. I don't have anything to do with policy and how the police department handles their people, so I'm just looking at the criminal component, and I'll defer those questions to the police department.
Is there any lawsuit going?
No idea. And it wouldn't have any effect on my decision. My decision would have no effect on it.
You mentioned there could be consequences. Do you know what those potential consequences could be?
I do.
Are you willing to share that?
I'm not. And again, have I ever answered questions like this in 10 years? No. I'm being cryptic for a reason. And only as to the kids, not as to the cop. I'm not withholding a thing as to the cop.
You talked about like that a reasonable person could say that he was acting in self-defense. You said for a cop on job, but he wasn't a cop. He was off duty.
He's a cop. I mean, why is he there in a uniform wearing a badge? He's a cop. That's a distinction without a difference.
Just to be clear, what were the exact charges that this officer potentially faced?
Misdemeanor battery.
Nothing more?
And you said was there anything that wasn't out? Can you walk through a little bit what wasn't on video that basically everybody saw happen before that?
So I walked you through the fact that she said she was, she threatened, tried to.
I'm sorry, with him. Once you get to that.
So she's on the ground, female cops trying to cuff her, male cops at the girl's feet, and then the witnesses say the boy comes in from outside and begins to punch the officer in the back of the head. I don't know how many times, people were not on the same page, but a couple of times in the back of the head when the officer reacted. And around, as best I can tell, cop reacts. As they gets to his feet, that's when the cameras come on. So.
Did he have any injuries from being hit?
I'm not aware that either of them had any lasting injuries. There's probably some redness, but.
Were the parents ever contacted at any point in time during the investigation?
I don't know how to answer that question because of work. I'll leave it at that.
One of the parents claimed that she was not allowed access to her child when taken to JIAC until 4 hours later. Can you confirm that was the case?
I cannot. I don't know whether they were or not, and that's not part of my review. I review the criminal component of a case.
You were saying the stand your ground. What's like the latest with that at the state level? Is there?
Law hasn't changed.
Okay.
Again, the officer was acting in self-defense. Period. Paragraph. My words on the stand your ground get filtered through people's interpretation. The officer's acting in self-defense. He just is. You don't have a right to punch a cop in the back of the head, and he has a right to defend himself. For me to charge him, I would have to be able to establish that what he did was not reasonable. I cannot do that. Call it stand your ground, call it self-defense, call it what, there's no step forward on a charge here.
What would typically the boy face for what he did?
Misdemeanor battery of a law enforcement officer.
His would be too.
Yeah. No, the great aggravator about things like that happen when you have weapons or when somebody really gets injured. You punch, break a nose, No one was injured here. Everything we're talking about is in the misdemeanor range, no matter who is being assessed.
It sounds like what you're saying. It's going to be whatever you work out with him is going to be less severe than that.
Sorry, I've got a cough, guys. Sorry. Okay.
Chief, are you willing to take any?
I'll make a statement.
I mean, how long has the officer been on the force? Prior date?
So, but I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just making a quick statement. Sorry. So thank you. First of all, I want to thank Sheriff Jeff Easter and his staff for conducting a comprehensive investigation. I want to thank our district attorney for reviewing the case and determining that there was no criminal element here. Therefore, I also want to thank all of you for your restraint, your patience, and your professionalism. I know you have a lot of questions, but as you can see, and as I promised, there's a process that we have to go through. And now we are 2/3 of the way through that process. And now that the district attorney has eliminated the possibility of criminal charges, the administrative investigation by the Wichita Police Department Professional Standards Bureau will now begin. And at the conclusion of that, I will make a statement, at which time I will take questions, and I'll be able to answer the questions, the majority that you're unfortunately looking for answers from me today. But because it is an active Professional Standards Bureau investigation, I will not be taking any questions today or making any further statements. Thank you.
You won't say how long he's been on force? the officer.
I'm not going to make any further statements.
Do you have a time frame?
I don't.
Approximate time frame?
I don't.